In this video, we're going to go over some of the absolute creepiest disappearances of all time, and what makes them so creepy is that the people might still be out there somewhere. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Antoinette Cayedito was born on Christmas Day in 1976. Her mother was of the Navajo Nation, while her father was of Italian and Hispanic descent. Unfortunately, her parents separated when she was just a kid, so her mother would go on to raise her and her two younger sisters in the city of Gallup, New Mexico, on her own. As a kid, Antoinette couldn't have been described better by the people who knew her. Considered to be level-headed and wise beyond her years, she was friendly and good in school, dependable, and exceptionally caring. At just 6 years old, she was helping cook for her sisters and ironing all of their clothes for the week, and given that their mom was alone raising them, Antoinette just naturally took on a nurturing role for her younger siblings. In addition to all the help she provided at home, at school at her 4th grade class she was attentive and got excellent grades, but she was particularly gifted in athletics and sports. During that year, she earned something called the Presidential Fitness Award for her athletic ability. She was also raised Christian, and so as with the other aspects of her life, Antoinette was dedicated and devoted time to Bible study each week. On April 6th of 1986, her mother was out with some friends at a bar one evening, and Antoinette and her two younger sisters were at home with a babysitter. Around midnight, her mom got home from the bar and then sent the babysitter home for the night. Her mom then said goodnight to her girls, and then she also went to her room and went to bed. This was the last time her mother would ever see Antoinette. The following morning, her mom and her sisters woke up and quickly realized that she was not in her bed or anywhere else in the house. They called out to her and walked around and got more frantic the more it set in that she was completely gone. After realizing that her 9-year-old daughter had vanished sometime in the night, Antoinette's mother Penny was beside herself and started going to every single one of their neighbors' houses to see if anyone had seen Antoinette. Then when no one else had seen her either, she called the police in hysterics, explaining to them that her daughter was missing. Police started a search shortly after that of the neighborhood and the surrounding area, but they found no trace of her. No clothing, none of her stuff, she was just gone. To the police, this screamed foul play because how else could a child have gotten so far in the span of just a few hours, and they started to think that she might have been kidnapped. But because they had literally zero to go on, the police had nothing to offer Penny. Then once the preliminary search had been called off, the family just sort of had to live with the fact that Antoinette was gone and that was it, which was obviously crushing and terrifying. The following year, 1987, things would only get worse for the Cayeditos. One day, a call came in to the Gallup City Police Station. On the phone was a young girl who went on to explain that her name was Antoinette and that she was somewhere in Albuquerque. The operator started to ask where exactly she was, but before the girl had a chance to answer, the voice of a man was heard in the back. The man then said, "Who said you could use the phone?" Then the girl screamed, then there was some sort of scuffle, and then the line went dead. Police immediately called Penny into the station and played the horrifying audio to her, and right away, Penny knew that it was Antoinette. Not only did she recognize the voice, but it was the way that she said the name that really indicated to her that this was her daughter. Unfortunately though, she didn't recognize the man's voice and there was no way to trace the call, so the police had no way to locate the girl on the phone. This was just torturous because it gave the family hope that Antoinette was alive, while simultaneously crushing their hope even further with still nothing to go on. She was likely still alive, but under what circumstances? Then there was just nothing for another few years. 5 years later, in 1991, trying to keep Antoinette's name relevant, police released an age-progressed picture of her. Not long after that, a waitress called the police station claiming to have seen a young girl matching Antoinette's description at a restaurant that she worked at. Police interviewed the waitress, and she said that she served a man and a woman who had a young girl with them who was about 14 years old. She described them all as unkempt looking, and during their meal, the girl seemed to almost intentionally knock her utensils off the table. The waitress picked them up off the floor for the girl, but then when she handed them to her, the girl squeezed her hand tightly. At the time, she didn't think much of it, but then when she was clearing their table after they left, she found a napkin under the girl's plate that read, "Please help me, call police." But by the time she found it, the couple had already driven away with the girl. This again gave the family hope of Antoinette still being out there somewhere and prompted the police to re-interview all the people close to the case. This included her younger sister Wendy. At the time of Antoinette's disappearance, Wendy was just 5 years old. But now 10 years old, when the police interviewed her again, Wendy told them that she had actually witnessed her sister's abduction the night she went missing. That night when her mom got home, the two girls were still awake or were woken up. Their mother went to bed shortly after that, and this left Antoinette and Wendy in the living room. Around 3 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Both of the girls looked at each other, and then Antoinette walked over to the door and asked who it was. She heard back from the other side that it was Uncle Joe, and because there was actually an Uncle Joe in the family, Antoinette opened the door. As soon as she did, she saw that it was actually two men, and they immediately grabbed her and started pulling her away from the home. She yelled at them to let her go and to get off her, but it was already too late and she was gone. It's not clear if they closed the door behind them or if Wendy closed it, but either way, Wendy just sat there in shock and terrified. She was so scared that she decided not to say anything about it because she thought she might get in trouble. Following this revelation, investigators went to question their Uncle Joe, but he was ruled out pretty quickly. What it did tell them, though, was that the men that took her seemed to have some knowledge of the family to know their uncle's name. But unfortunately, other than that, not much else is known about the case, and it went cold from there. Antoinette has been missing for 37 years. She was 9 when she was abducted, but she would now be 47. Here is an age-progressed picture of her. Investigators assume that she might be dead because so much time has passed with no sign of her. Then, her mother passed away in 1999, which left even more questions than answers. Some cold case detectives had intended to interview her after discovering a failed polygraph test. She'd also made a number of expensive purchases following Antoinette's disappearance. This has led to some theories that maybe her mother was involved in some way. Then, her father passed away in 2012, and her sisters have normal lives and families of their own. Wendy unfortunately doesn't remember much about her sister, but is still very much affected by that night. This case is as disturbing as it is heartbreaking. In 1974, Perry Corlew was just 18 years old, and he had just bought an awesome brand new car. After buying it, he obviously had to go test it out, and so around 8 p.m. he took it for a spin around the neighborhood. About an hour later, police received a call from a truck driver saying that there was a vehicle sitting on the side of the I-75 about 15 miles south of the city of Grayling. Police drove out there to check out the car and found that the engine was still running, the headlights were still on, the driver's side door was open, and there was no one in and around the vehicle. They went on to search it and discovered that it belonged to Perry Corlew, but as of that evening, Perry had gone missing. Police eventually contacted Perry's parents and asked if they'd seen him, but his parents responded that as far as they knew, he was out driving around. And basically, from that day forward, no one ever saw Perry again. Now here's where it gets weird. It seemed like the car had been in some sort of accident, there was some minor damage, like it was a fender bender, but there was no one else to report the accident. On top of that, it had been snowing in and around the time Perry was driving around, and police found 0 tracks leading away from the vehicle. And it wasn't like there were tracks that were recently covered over, there were just no tracks at all. He was just in the car and then he wasn't. And although the car was parked near the Grayling Rialto Theatre, there weren't any witnesses to any accidents or anyone who saw where Perry went. Following his disappearance, his family speculated that he might have left the scene because he was on probation for breaking and entering and he had a poor driving record. But would that be reason enough to disappear entirely? It's not like the accident itself would have been enough for him to violate his probation. It's possible maybe he was intoxicated at the time and thought that that would be enough for a violation, but couldn't he just reappear once he was sober? Purposely disappearing just doesn't seem to make all that much sense. But again, from that day forward, Perry was just gone. In 1978, his parents thought they might have seen him on TV during a news broadcast, but this couldn't be verified. Then in 1992, the FBI reopened the case and released an age-progressed picture of Perry, hoping to generate some new leads. That same year, Perry's brother Michael received a mysterious phone call. The voice on the phone began imitating cartoon characters exactly like what he and Perry used to do when they were kids. Kind of in shock, Michael didn't really know how to respond. Then the person on the phone asked Michael what he thought of the voices, and before Michael could respond, the line just disconnected. And that is the last update in the case. That was already 30 years ago. So, Perry Corlew is just gone. It seems like he just stopped on the side of the road and then vanished into thin air. The phone call is as equally creepy as it is confusing. Born on May 12, 1974 in Virginia, Amy Lynn Bradley was a beautiful and talented 23-year-old who had a bright future ahead of her. She was highly athletic, and this athleticism earned her a basketball scholarship at Longford University in Farmville, Virginia. On top of that, she was a strong swimmer and volunteered as both a swimming instructor and a lifeguard. After graduating from university with a degree in physical education, she was heading back to college to get a master's degree in sports psychology. She had also recently accepted a position working at a computer consulting firm. In early 1998, Amy's father, Ron Bradley, won a cruise to the Caribbean islands, and so Ron and his wife, Iva, wanted to take the family on one more major vacation before Amy and her brother, Brad, pursued careers and had families of their own. At some point, Ron's friend Zachary was also invited by the family, so it would be 5 of them in total. On March 21st, the Bradley family and Zachary boarded a Royal Caribbean cruise ship known as the Rhapsody. They set sail from the Pan American pier of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and were headed to the beautiful island of Aruba. As soon as they began their cruise, Amy's mother and father noticed that she was attracting a lot of unwanted attention from the crew members. At one point, after the family ate dinner, a waiter approached Iva and asked her where her daughter was. Her mother was taken aback by the forward question and asked why he needed to know. The waiter responded that he and some of the other crew members wanted to invite Amy to go to a restaurant in the area. Though she didn't say it outright, Iva felt a bit uneasy by the fairly forward and inappropriate question. When Amy returned, her father told her that one of the waiters had stopped at their table and asked to take her out with his friends. She gave her father a look and then told him that she thought it was creepy, and she also made it clear to both her parents that she didn't intend on going anywhere with the men. Adding to the creep factor, a dance company had boarded the cruise ship, and one of the members, a bass player, had been flirting heavily with Amy and been sort of crossing the line with his advances. But despite these uncomfortable incidents, Amy was traveling with her family and her brother's friend, who were always nearby. 3 days into the cruise, the Rhapsody began its second leg of the journey by heading south towards Curacao. The distance between the two islands is 113 kilometers or 70 miles, which meant it would take the cruise ship between 4 to 6 hours to travel. The night before, Amy and her brother had watched a concert orchestra named Blue Orchid play. Amy had made friends with a few of the orchestra members and was invited to a party with them after the show at one of the ship's nightclubs. During the party, Amy and Brad danced and got drinks from the bar, and by chance, a TV director and video editor named Chris Fenwick happened to be producing a video at the same club. He had spent most of his time in his cabin working on editing projects until that night. It was during this chance encounter that Amy was caught on video just hours before she would disappear and never be seen again. In this video, she was seen dancing with one of the orchestra members, a man by the nickname Yellow. At around 3:30 a.m., after the party had wound down, both Amy and Brad returned to their cabin at the end of the night. After they got into their room, the two of them spent some time catching up on the balcony until Brad was finally tired enough and told Amy he was going to bed. She told him she was going to try to sleep on the balcony in a lounge chair because the motion of the sick was kind of making her seasick and the fresh air was nice. With that, the two of them said goodnight and then they both fell asleep. At some point after they fell asleep, Ron woke up and looked around the room and saw Brad, then Amy outside on the balcony. Seeing that his kids were both safe and in the room, he went right back to sleep. About 30 minutes later, at about 6 a.m., Ron woke up again and looked over to the balcony and saw that Amy was no longer in the lounge chair and the balcony door had been left open. Almost immediately, he had sort of a funny feeling about her being gone. It was unlike her to be up so early, especially after having been up so late. Upon seeing this, he got up and left the room and went to some of the ship's common areas, hoping to run into her. Then, when he couldn't find her anywhere either, he started to get a little bit more anxious. He went back to the room and woke up Iva and Brad and asked if either of them knew where she had gone. Brad thought she had mentioned getting off in port that day to buy some stuff, but figured she'd wait until later to go with everyone. Already, something didn't seem right to Amy's parents, so they went to tell the security on the ship that she was missing. In a panic, her mom pleaded with the crew not to put the planks down to the port. She basically begged them to lock up the ship so that no one could get off before search was completed. Amy's mom was convinced that someone had taken her daughter. She also pleaded with them to make an announcement calling Amy to the deck they were on. Unfortunately, the crew refused to do either of these. They definitely weren't holding up the ship to do a search, and they also refused to make an announcement because they said it was too early in the morning. So it wasn't until around 8 a.m. when almost everyone had already left the ship that an announcement was made. By this point, Amy's mom was frantic. She knew that if Amy was in a position to hear the announcement, she would have come to where they were right away. To her, this meant that Amy was either gone or trapped somewhere and being prevented from coming to where they were. Finally, hours after the announcement was made, the captain ordered a search of the ship. The crew would go in to search all 10 decks and 999 rooms, but would find nothing, no trace of Amy. After the search revealed nothing, it finally seemed to clue into the ship's crew that this was serious, so the authorities were contacted and an official search was launched. The Coast Guard would then go on to search a huge swath of the ocean where the ship had been over the course of several days, and more searching of the ship was done as well. In the meantime, the family was literally sick with anxiety. It was made worse by the fact that it had happened in such a short time in a relatively small area. Just 1 second she was there and 1 second she wasn't. Over the course of the next couple of days, the family was able to piece together some more information about Amy's time after she left the room. They knew that she had changed clothes and grabbed her cigarettes, but they didn't know where she was going. Then, they managed to find a woman who had actually seen Amy after she left the room. The woman had seen Amy walking with the bass player from the band. The two of them walked by and then up to the next deck, and then about 10 minutes later, the bassist walked back down, this time without Amy. Creepily as well, Brad realized that he happened to run into the bassist sometime the morning after her disappearance. The bassist apologized for what happened to his sister, but in recollecting the interaction, Brad was fairly certain that at that point, only the family and the ship's security knew anything was wrong. In the moment of the interaction, Brad was just too panicked to notice that it was weird. The bassist was eventually questioned, but authorities never found any evidence of his involvement. So, officially, Amy's disappearance was listed as either an accidental falling or intentional jumping because of the lack of evidence to support any other theories. However, despite this official statement, it hasn't stopped rumors from spreading about some more sinister scenarios. These also happen to have some very creepy evidence to back them up. In the South Caribbean, there is a reputation for trafficking that occurs in a sort of black market. It's been suggested by some, including the Bradley family, that Amy was the victim of this activity. Over the years as well, there have been some unusual reported sightings that seem to lend credibility to this idea. First, there was a cab driver who claimed to see a woman matching her description who came up to him and asked to use his cell phone. Next, in August of 1998, so just a few months after her disappearance, a Canadian computer engineer was walking along the beach when he saw a woman matching her description with two men. It seemed like she was trying to get his attention. Apparently, her tattoos were an exact match for Amy's. He followed them for a little bit, but eventually lost sight of her in a cafe. The man who saw her claims to be 100% certain that it was her. The next possible sighting was in January of 1999, so a little less than a year later. Apparently, a US Navy officer claims to have seen her in a brothel in Curacao. She apparently begged for his help and explained that she was being held against her will, but unfortunately, the officer didn't report it at the time of it happening because he feared the repercussions on his career for visiting a brothel. It was only later, once he retired, that he reported the sighting after seeing her picture in a magazine. Then again, in 2005, a woman claimed to see Amy in a department store bathroom in Barbados. Apparently, the woman entered the store with three men who threatened her if she didn't follow through with the deal. After the men left, she came up to the woman and claimed her first name was Amy and she was from Virginia. Before the woman could do anything, the men came in and took her away. The woman called the police and was brought in to make sketches of the men, but nothing ever came of it. The final and possibly the most famous sighting suggesting that Amy is being held against her will is this picture of a woman known as Jazz. For those of you just listening, it's a picture of a woman who looks almost identical to Amy in a suggestive position on a bed. This picture was apparently put up on an escort site, and then later, this photo and one other were sent to the website set up by Amy's family. I can't imagine how disturbing it would have been for the family to receive those pictures. But to this day, nothing has ever come of any of these sightings. So that leaves us with just a few possibilities. The first is the official story that she accidentally fell overboard or jumped. However, despite an extensive search, no body was ever found in the ocean. The second is the much more sinister explanation that these really were sightings of her and that she's still out there somewhere being held against her will. To this day, a $250,000 reward is being offered for any information about her whereabouts. Hello everyone, my name is Sean and welcome to Scary Interesting. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like to see more like this, let me know down in the comments. If you want to support the channel, give this video a like and subscribe if you aren't already so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.